Hello and welcome to today's lesson looking at osmosis. In previous lessons we've looked at diffusion and exchange surfaces. Today we need to look at another process known as osmosis. So by the end of this lesson you should be able to define the word osmosis, you should be able to explain what is meant by the term semi-permeable membrane, and you should be able to give some examples of how osmosis is used by living organisms. So as previously mentioned, we've spoken in the last few lessons about diffusion and exchange surfaces, and we saw that different particles move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So we can start by saying that substances like oxygen and carbon dioxide move by diffusion. Now, water molecules do not move by diffusion. So we can put in red that water molecules do not move by diffusion. Now that is a really important point, so I've put it in red, okay? So water molecules do not move by diffusion. Instead, water molecules move by a process known as osmosis. Osmosis, O-S-M-O-S-I-S, and I've put that in green because it's a key word. Now, just to pre-warn you, we're going to define osmosis now. You're going to need 3 different colours to hand because I'm going to be highlighting some key parts. So, osmosis can be defined as the movement of water molecules through a semi-permeable membrane. I'm going to put that in orange. Through a semi-permeable membrane. Put a dash between those. So it's the movement of water molecules through a semi-permeable membrane, and we can go back to our normal pen, from a dilute solution to a concentrated solution. Okay? So our definition says that osmosis is the movement of water molecules through a semi-permeable membrane from a dilute solution to a concentrated solution. And we've put semi-permeable membrane, dilute solution and concentrated solution in a different colour as they require a bit further of an explanation. Apologies, I needed a drink. So our next key term is this one here in orange, the bit I want to focus on. Semi-permeable membrane. Semi-permeable membrane. Now, a semi-permeable membrane can be defined as a membrane that allows certain substances substances to cross it, but not others. To cross it, but not others. Now, essentially, a semi-permeable membrane will usually let water cross it, and it will usually let very small molecules cross it. But it won't let larger molecules cross it, okay? It acts as sort of like a bouncer to a nightclub. A bouncer at a nightclub will let certain people in and not others. The semi-permeable membrane is kind of like that. It's selective in what it allows to cross the membrane. So we can just put underneath here, we can say that it usually allows small particles and water to cross it, but not large molecules, but not large molecules. Okay? So that's our semi-permeable membrane. It's the movement of water. Osmosis is the movement of water molecules through a membrane that will let certain particles through and not others. Before we think about what a dilute solution and a concentrated solution is, we need to think about two other keywords. The first keyword is a solvent. S-O-L-V-E-N-T. Solvent. A solvent can be defined as a liquid in which solutes dissolve. So a solvent is a liquid in which solutes dissolve. A solute is S-O-L-U-T-E-S. That's not a V, that's a U, okay? Now, examples of solvents include, so e.g., water and ethanol. Ethanol is another solvent that you may hear about in science. So a solute is different to a solvent. So a solute, S-O-L-U-T-E, a solute is defined as a substance which dissolves, or which dissolves in a solvent. So the solvent is the liquid doing the dissolving, the solute is the substance dissolved in the liquid. Now you're probably sitting there thinking, why is this important? Well, it's important so that we understand what dilute solutions are and what concentrated solutions are. So for the benefit of this analogy, I want you to imagine that I've got two beakers. Okay? So I've got two beakers. Beaker 1 contains a dilute solution. So my dilute solution is here. Beaker 2, on the other hand, contains my concentrated solution. Okay? Now we're going to be talking about two particles. We're going to be talking about water, which I'm going to draw in blue. So these are my water particles. And we're going to be talking about other particles, which I'm going to put in this red colour, which are our solutes. Solutes. So water is our solvent, the solutes are our solutes. Now in a dilute solution, you will always have more water particles than you will solutes. So I've drawn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we can draw some solutes in 1, 2, 3. On the other hand, in a concentrated solution, you will have more solutes than you will solvents. So I've drawn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm going to draw 1, 2, 3 water particles. So we can say underneath these that dilute solutions contain more water particles than solutes. On the other hand, concentrated solutions contain more solutes than they do water. Contain more solute particles than water particles. So we've said that substances like oxygen and carbon dioxide move by diffusion. Water molecules do not move by diffusion. Instead, they move by something called osmosis. Osmosis is the movement of water molecules through a semi-permeable membrane from a dilute solution to a concentrated solution. A semi-permeable membrane is a membrane that allows certain substances to cross it, but not others. It usually allows small particles and water to cross through it, but not large molecules. Solvents are liquids into which solutes dissolve, such as water and ethanol. So water is a solvent, whereas solutes are substances which are dissolved in a solvent. A dilute solution, which is what we're talking about here, is a solution that contains more water particles than solute particles, whereas a concentrated solution contains more solute particles than water particles. Now, this is not entirely true. Okay, so if you're really clued up on science and you're watching this video thinking, well, that's not true, for the sake of this video, it is. For the sake of osmosis at GCSE, it is easier to think of concentrated and dilute in this way. So if you haven't got the notes down yet, pause this video because I need to refresh the screen as we need to think about osmosis. Okay, so let's refresh our screen. Let's hope that the video doesn't crash because I've had to record it twice already. So I want you to imagine that we've got an area that is separated by a semi-permeable membrane. So this is my semi-permeable membrane in orange. So semi, that's the worst writing of the word semi ever. Semi-permeable membrane. So that's shown in orange, okay? On one side, we're going to have a dilute solution. So if you think back to what we've just written down, we need more water particles than we do solutes. So I've put 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I'm going to put my solutes in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On the other side, we've got our concentrated solution. So our concentrated solution. And if you think back to the definition we wrote down, a concentrated solution contains more water particles than, more solute particles than it does water particles. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then I'm going to put my water particles in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? So again, just for this video, we've got water particles in blue, and we've got solutes in this reddy colour. Okay? So, looking at this and thinking about our definition of osmosis, so osmosis, just to refresh your memory, to make sure you've got it, it's a very important one. Osmosis is the movement of water particles from a dilute solution, water particles through a semi-permeable membrane from a dilute solution to a concentrated solution. From a dilute solution to a concentrated solution. So it says that we're going from dilute to concentrated through a semi-permeable membrane. So if we're looking at this diagram above that I drew earlier, we can conclude that the movement of osmosis would be from the dilute solution to the concentrated solution through the semi-permeable membrane. So it is the movement of water particles from a dilute solution through a semi-permeable membrane to a concentrated solution. So these red arrows represent osmosis. The water particles move through a semi-permeable membrane from a dilute solution to a concentrated solution. Okay? At the same time, the solute particles would be far too big to pass through the semi-permeable membrane, so they don't move anywhere. The water molecules are the only things that can cross it, because remember, this semi-permeable membrane only lets certain things through. So it would only let water particles through, but not the solutes. So we can just say underneath here that the semi-permeable membrane allows water molecules to cross it, but not solutes. This means that there wouldn't be any diffusion. You would only be getting osmosis taking place. So osmosis is the movement of water molecules through a semi-permeable membrane from a dilute solution to a concentrated solution. Now, cells in our body need water for chemical reactions to take place. So again, I do need to refresh the screen. If you haven't got everything down, you can rewind the video or pause it or do whatever to make sure you've got the notes. So we can start by saying that cells, I'm putting this in regs, it's important, need water to provide, they need water for chemical reactions. Okay? Now, there's a couple of ways that cells react to osmosis. Okay? So the first thing we can talk about is osmosis in animal cells. And we can underline it. So osmosis in animal cells. So if we've got a regular animal cell, okay, and I'm going to draw it in the middle here, there's my animal cell with its nucleus. There are two things that can happen to this animal cell. The first thing that we're going to talk about is that osmosis can cause water to leave the cell. If the cell loses all of its water, it will shrivel. So this is our animal cell to begin with. And this is a shriveled cell. And we can say, next to the animal cell, that if the surrounding liquid to the cell is more concentrated, comma, so if the surrounding liquid to the cell is more concentrated, water leaves the cell making it shrivel and die. Making it shrivel and die. So in animal cells, if the surrounding solution is more concentrated, the water leaves the cell and it makes it shrivel and die. On the other hand, if the surrounding solution is more dilute, what will happen is that water will move into the cell, and rather than the cell shriveling and dying, what will happen instead is that the cell will burst. Okay, so there's its nucleus. We're going to use a nice blue colour to show that it's burst. We're going to put some red around it, like so, to hopefully show that the cell is bursting. So this is a burst cell. B-U-R-S-T, cell. So if the surrounding liquid to the cell is more dilute, water will enter the cell and eventually it will burst like a water balloon. So we can say, if the surrounding liquid to the cell is dilute, comma, water enters the cell and it bursts. So if water leaves an animal cell, it will start to shrivel and die. However, if too much water enters an animal cell, it will fill up so much that it will burst. Now, this is a very important principle as you move into year 11. When we start looking at things like diabetes, it's important that you understand about the shriveling and bursting of cells and concentrated and dilute solutions. To just finish off our lesson today, we need to think about how osmosis affects plant cells, and then we're done. So we can put the subheading, please, osmosis in plant cells. And we can underline it. Now, plant cells rely on water for structural support. If you see a plant that's drooping, oftentimes it's because it hasn't got enough water. Therefore, we can conclude that plant cells, I'm putting it in regs, it's important, plant cells rely on water for structural support. So as I said, plants that don't have enough water are usually very, very droopy. Okay? Now, if you think about a plant cells are very different from animal cells. So plant cells tend to have two layers. They have a cell membrane and they have a cell wall. Okay? Inside the plant we have chlorophyll. That's not massively relevant to this, but just so we know it's a plant cell, I'll put my nucleus in there. In fact, I'm going to put my green chlorophyll in first. And then I'm going to put my nucleus inside. Okay? If water leaves a plant cell, much like we saw with the animal cell, it will shrivel and start to die. Okay? So we'll get the shriveling of the plant cell. So we can say, next to this arrow, if water leaves the cell, it will shrivel and die. Exactly like we said with the animal cell. So we can put down here next to this cell, shriveled plant cell. On the other hand, and this brings us, in fact we've got two more keywords. On the other hand, if a plant cell fills with water, it will not burst. The reason it will not burst is because they have what's known as a cell wall. And this simply just stops the cell from bursting, so it's able to fill with water. This is something known as turgidity, or it becomes turgid. So we can say here, if water enters the cell, comma, the cell wall prevents the cell bursting and it becomes turgid. It becomes turgid. So, turgid we can define as a key word. Turgid, Turgid. Turgid means plant cells which are full of water and their cell walls bow out as a result. There is another key word we can use over here for cells that are starting to shrivel in plants. We can say that they become flaccid, or they can cause the stem of a plant to become flaccid. And essentially what that means is floppy. So if you think of a plant stem that hasn't had much water, the plant stem is very floppy. That is because the cells are not turgid, they're not filled with water, and it doesn't provide the stem with much support. So you should now be able to tell me what the word osmosis means. You should be able to explain what is meant by a semi-permeable membrane, and you should be able to explain what happens to animal and plant cells in terms of the movement of water in and out of them. Please let me know if you have any questions about this lesson. However, until next time, thank you very much.